Hello, welcome everyone to the next PADE workshop. Today we will be talking all about Wikidata. If anybody needs any closed captioning, please see the bottom of the screen. There's a live transcript button with a CC in it. You are welcome to click on that and you'll get some live captioning happening right on your screen. I'll send that in the chat as well if anyone needs to take a look at that. I'm also going to be, once Inga gets started, I'm going to send over the slides. I haven't had a chance to upload them yet to the website, but I'll send them in the Zoom chat so that everyone can have them while we're talking through stuff today. So without any further ado, I'll pass it along to Inga.
Awesome. Of course, you know, in all fairness, the reason why you haven't done that, Amy, is because I sent them to you late last night.
I did manage to translate them,
Wow.
but I didn't get a chance to put them on the website yet.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's good to see you all again. What we're going to be talking about today is linked open data on the internet. And one of the key tools today around linked open data is Wikidata. So Wikidata is part of the Wikimedia conglomerate of, you know, this not-for-profit organization that runs Wikipedia, which is what most of us use one way or another, if we want to or not. But many web searches, even if you never go to Wikipedia, actually are generated from it, as you may notice that. Why is open? What is linked open data on the internet, and why is it important to you? We've kind of touched on it a little bit in other conversations, so I'm just curious if any of you have any inkling of what that's all about.
I think you were speaking last week to the part about when things are being scraped and whether you turn up or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So what's beautiful about linked open data, as opposed to bots simply going to your website and scraping data off it. I mean, that could be Google, you know, a bot like that, or that could be a local calendar of events website that just automates that process, right? What's nice about linked open data is that those directories are actually run by humans. And many of them are available to us, mere mortals, to actually populate with information. So we are able to generate accurate, real facts about ourselves and put them into a context in which other organizations, such as search engines, actually use them to help them generate answers to searches that get done in those engines. So it's a little different from having a website and making sure that your events are discoverable by using structured data, right? That's what the topic last week was, where that process around structured data is very much taking your content that you code, your website makes available through code in a particular way so that search engines and others can understand your event information and render that as an answer on Google when people type in what's up on Friday night in Stratford, or worse, what's happening in Ontario or in Toronto, or, you know, where near me is another good search. what's on near me that I can go to, right? So that process, you know, you're in charge of that in a different way than what linked open data is about. So I want to show you briefly a couple of examples of what linked open data drives to help us understand this a little bit better. So I'm just going to share my, sorry, I'm looking for it. There we are. I'm going to share my actual screen. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. Can you actually read what's on here, or maybe I have to do that? Okay. So you see, I've just did a search here for Canadian puppeteers. And look, Ronnie shows up first in that line. How do these Puppeteers Canada thing, how does that appear at the top here? Right, we're on Google. Google has this magic way of making sense of information in the world. Chances are a whole bunch of this information actually comes out of linked open data directories such as Wikidata. that somebody, not Ronnie, not even his manager, or not even anybody associated with his company, possibly simply somebody who likes his work, started to populate. Perhaps a librarian might have started to populate that, or perhaps it was a bot. But all to say, for this kind of search result to happen, this is very different from what search results used to look like, right? This sort of image bar at the top. Search results used to just be these, look like this, bunch of links, no images, and you're supposed to make sense of that, right? So this is one of those pieces where when I do a generic search like Canadian puppeteers, how do I get into that bar? Might be your question, if by chance you're a Canadian puppeteer. Or similarly, if you're a theater artist or a producer or a presenting company or a festival, the question that you need to ask yourself is, how do I get to that level of discoverability? And one of the components in that is to start to get smart about making sure that you have listings within things like Wikidata. You may know that it's really hard to generate your own Wikipedia entry. Does anybody know why that is? Why is Wikipedia, kind of closed down a little bit? And why might Wikidata, a sister project, be wide open for us to add our own information? So Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It's not a directory. And it has a bunch of publishing rules around unbiased information and to be neutral, verifiable, citations. It has to be free content that anyone can use. But when you try to update your own information or generate your own information, their rules, while they don't say you can't do it, they're tricky in that if it starts to look like it's a promotional piece of text or you're not encyclopedia worthy, you're not famous enough, you can get blacklisted, and then you can't generate any other Wikipedia entries or edits. That's why it gets news coverage when politicians' offices or ministries start to edit content, not considered a neutral source, right? That's Wikipedia as an encyclopedia and its rules. Wikidata is just about the facts. So the way it looks and feels is completely different from what an encyclopedia entry is like. And as a result of it being the way it's organized, the way it works, they invite anyone, including the owners of content, us, right, owning our own content, to be participating in generating Wikidata listings. Now, I want to show you a couple of other things. So this kind of a search result, that's intriguing, right? If I can position myself in that lineup of puppeteers, I might be pretty happy. So structured data is one aspect of that, but we've talked about structured data primarily, like the metadata on your website, primarily from an event standpoint. I think last week we touched on the opportunity if you wanted to expand sort of the sector footprint, that as opposed to just focusing on the event, you could add structured data for the people involved in an event, right? So this is at the other side of that, is to actually have that people information housed in Wikidata instead, and you increase the odds of becoming discoverable, right? Discoverability is what this conversation is all about. Now, I want to show you another use of this information. So, when I do a search for Ronnie Burkett, you get this knowledge panel on the side, right? For many, many things. And we've seen those for organizations too. We've seen that for Crane Creations, for instance. And you see all of this information that is available, the imagery, a description of him in terms of Canadian puppeteer. There's this Wikipedia piece of text that describes him, born, place, location, books that somehow refer to something. Perhaps he wrote them, perhaps he's in them, perhaps it's the random reference because it's puppeteering. TV shows, movies. These should be Ronnie Burkett's profiles on Instagram and Twitter. And then we've got people also searched for. So once again, this people also searched for piece. How do I get myself in there if I'm a Canadian puppeteer is the question. So a lot of the information you see here, Google has aggregated about Ronnie Burkett and has decided that it's unambiguously about that Ronnie Burkett, right? And one element of that is that, you know, he might have a fantastic website. Other people might have referenced him. He obviously has a Wikipedia entry. He's famous enough for that. That's great. And then, but information like, you know, dates he was born at, where he was born, place he might have been creating, his Instagram and Twitter profiles. There's a couple of ways in which that can actually show up here. One is that there is a Wikidata entry. And in Wikidata, all of this information is either simply given as a fact or cross-referenced. There is a really neat function called same as that disambiguates this. So if your name is John Doe, there might be a million of you. How do I know it's that John Doe? That is that puppeteer, right? That is a Canadian, that is all that. So there's functions in terms of saying, well, this website is the same as this Facebook page, is the same as this Instagram account, to make sure that Google understands and other search engines understand that that truly is the same organization or the same person. But you can also do that in Wikidata, where there is an opportunity to add that in a listing. So I'm showing you these two pieces only to say, hey, this is actually important because, you know, that Google Knowledge Panel has a bunch of different sources of information. Some you're in charge of, and some have been really opaque. The Wikidata aspect of that has been really opaque, right? Where that Google goes and pulls that information into its own knowledge graph, into its own databases, and then decides how to use it, right? But others do as well. So it's important for us to start paying attention to that. Now, I'd set up a couple of ways to, so Lindy Greenwood, one of my favorite people. She's an actress, Canadian actress, lives in LA. And she happens to be my wife's daughter. So I sometimes use this as an example. So here's what a Wikidata entry looks like. One thing I might observe for you right now is that it's really ugly. It's just a database. It's as basic a database as a thing can be, where you see that, you know, I mean, I can edit anything, right? I can decide what images I want here, as long as they come out of the Wikimedia Commons piece. I'll talk about that in a second. You can remove stuff, you can cancel things, you can reference things, you can add references to stuff. There's lots of little functionalities here, but you see how it's basically just a really ugly database, right? And you see how you're not able to add sentences, right? This is very much just the facts. So things like gender, country, first name, last name, are there any other names, date of birth, which where it was, what the job is, where they went to school, when they started working. You know, a lot of Wikipedia entries tell you when somebody's career started. Well, often this isn't housed in Wikipedia. It comes out of the Wikidata information. So, right, so because that tombstone data basically can get easily generated from here. And then you see the social media references, and then most important perhaps for an actress down here is the identifiers. So these are a bunch of other linked open data directories that that also have listings for Lindy in it. And you see these numeric references. So those should be the actual numeric record of Lindy Greenwood in these other databases. Now, some of these databases are run by librarians. Like, think of the Library of Canada, they're run by librarians. Some of those are things that we mere mortals might be able to participate in. And some of those are subscription-based services that basically the companies you work with in movies, in, you know, industries like that would populate. And then you see Facebook ID, her IMDb listing is here. That's the movie database, right? That when you do a search for movies, that's usually what you end up on. You see her Instagram is referenced as well, right? So those are ways to disambiguate information about Lindy Greenwood. I have no idea if her name is unique in the world or not, right? But by adding all of these pieces here, you can be assured that errors shouldn't happen, right? Google wouldn't supersede this verified information with its own scraping of, I don't know if by chance she has a personal web page, right? You see how those relationships might be working? Now, you're only interested in an ugly looking thing like that because if you were to use it, it would increase the discoverability of you, your organization, what you do, and make you more discoverable online, right? It's not great for marketing one-off events. As you can see, right, the way that this database works, it's really for information that is quite static, sort of like an encyclopedia, right? Encyclopedias don't change every day. The information is the information. The fact is the fact. Here you can see that if you were to say, oh, I have an event coming up on Friday, and try to render that in this kind of database, that would actually be really quite hard. But if you have a recurring festival, this becomes really, really helpful. Because it sort of allows you to add a layer of information that you don't usually have related to that festival, such as date of inception, such as, that there might be, famous people associated with it. So your founding executive director, founding artistic directors, that might have gone back, 20, 30 years. If you think about the Stratford Festival, just for convenience sake, you would discover what is it now, 50+ year history. A whole bunch of famous people are attached to that thing that moved on to major, careers, right? So you can see how the festival is a hub of some pretty powerful information if they only put it online in a database like that. But if you imagine reading a history of the festival, like a narrative text, a lot of that information wouldn't show up. They would focus on other things, right? So it is helpful to sort of look at that as an adjunct to improve discoverability. All right, so I want to stop here for a moment. I'm trying to do both, give you a case for why this is actually really important. But I'm also trying to sort of get you used to, what this thing actually looks like a little bit, right? So comments, anything you're wondering about, are we following this train of thought?
Could you pull up one for an organization versus a person?
Sure. So I have, let me just, I don't know, for convenience sake. Here's a major venue that does both presentation and some production of arts. And you'll see it starts with stuff like, what type of organization is it? So in this case, it's a Crown Corporation, it's charitable, and it's got a bunch of performing arts groups in it. This is not unlike, and so the National Arts Center does two things, right? They're a venue, and they're also a producer. So what a venue information is, it's a little bit different from what a producing company information is. So sometimes you end up having two listings to account for, hey, this is the building versus this is the level of activity in the building. Images, the inception is actually a funny date here. It opened in 1969, not in 1966. What it does, official names, English and French, fantastic. Country, again, here's the coordinates. Why are those coordinates important? Do I have any Wikidata entry? It's because many things on Google are about what is near me, right? A lot of these searches are about where you are in a geography, and it relates all immediately. Google tends to know if you're logged in using Google, it knows where you are, it knows your IP address, it knows a bunch of stuff about you, right? So one of the criteria is relevancy of information. So if you do a search for restaurants near me or theaters near me, that this geographic referencing stuff is critically important. And then you see a bunch of the business divisions it has. So for some of you, you do seasons, but you also do festivals. It's akin to that, basically. Then you validate street addresses and a whole bunch of other information. And then you have sort of information around social media, the similar identifiers to disambiguate. So all the other databases that this a record about them exists shows up here as well. Okay, and like I say, our focus today is Wikidata, not all of the other ones. Some of those you're in charge of, like you can absolutely relate your, sort of your Instagram account, and you're in charge of what's on there. You're not necessarily in charge of what the virtual of what VIAF is doing, or ISNI. VIAF is like the virtual. It's a virtual library run by librarians with all kinds of, factual information about the world. ISNI is the International Standards Organization for names, people who work in the creative sector or who are creative producers. So not just arts and culture, also researchers. So some of those you can't easily edit at all, but there's a process to try to correct information if it's wrong. Can you see how this is relevant from a discoverability standpoint? It's a completely different slice of it, right? Than what we're used to thinking about. It's a pretty important slice to it. There is a number of these databases around. I'm just going to show this to you for a moment, just because in your field, in your area of interest, there may be some other pieces that sort of complete the world for you. So for instance, if there's a lot of music in the work you do, and perhaps you employ composers, things like Music Brains becomes important, which is an open music related linked open database. If you work with, touring folks in music, Songcake might come into play, right? So these are all ways to relate information to each other and generate a more powerful, discoverable footprint about the thing you do. So those adjacent pieces might be important. IMDb here is mostly on here because imagine IMDb for the performing arts, right? Imagine that level of information being aggregated about all the, set designers, the directors, the artistic directors, right? And having that, all of the people who've been in in the shows that you create. Imagine that level of information available about the performing arts, like it is for movies, right? Because you see how, in your personal use of, I'm looking up the cast for a thing. This happens a lot when we watch Netflix. Right? You want to know, damn, I can't remember this person's name. Who are they? What else have they done? I think I saw them in a thing. It's that train of thought, right? The performing arts doesn't have anything like that at this point. People are working on building that. A lot of the work that the Canadian Arts Presenting Association has been doing, KAPADCOA, has been really focused on data strategies, right? And it's kind of arcane and weird. But their end game is kind of longer out than I want to sell tickets to this event. Right, absolutely. So but if we don't start doing that, then we'll never be discoverable, and people will always find movie responses when I'm doing a search for theaters near me or shows near me, right? So we want to make sure that the performing arts sector starts to play in this. One way to do that is to start to really pay attention to linked open directories like Wikidata, and to start populating that. Similarly, you see Wikimedia Commons referenced here. It's part of that same universe, but it's all about media files and images. So it's the visual assets, the audio assets about a thing. So that's where a lot of, if you've ever gone to Google and you do a search for yourself and there's really old pictures that show up and you can't for the life of you figure out where they come from, there is a good chance that that's an old Wikimedia Commons picture. And because that's a trusted source as far as Google is concerned, they will default to that, as opposed to scraping stuff off your current website. That can happen, right? So sometimes when you have these inexplicable content about you that shows up as if it's completely current, that's often where you need to go and look and say, oh, I need to fix that. I need to edit that. I need to come up with a newer image. That's part of that doesn't have copyright attached to it. An image you own is what that means, as opposed to an image that a photographer owns that you hired. There's another initiative in Canada called artsdata.ca, which started a few years ago as a response to this lack of information about performing arts online. And they've been building a system bit by bit that uses Wikidata. It also feeds Wikidata. It's a back and forth kind of a thing. It was started by a company called Culture Creates in Montreal as a way to bring visibility to the sector. And they've done a fair amount of projects with a bunch of different performing arts organizations. They've also involved with Kapakoa on their data strategy stuff, right? So that is becoming like the one place in Canada that's been working to aggregate event information to a large extent. So primarily they scrape content from your websites for your events. And then that gets aggregated and they make that available to, appropriate sources in the world, Google being one of them. It's still early in that process, but I wanted to mention them because they're one of those few Canadian initiatives trying to generate that kind of visibility. How do you get on arts data? You just drop them an email and say, hey, my site is using structured data, and you can start picking that up. And you see, as you see as I'm speaking, there's always this interplay between structuring your data, which is a different process, and using linked open data, right? So arts data is a linked open data directory for events at this point, and they're looking to expand to the full universe. And perhaps one day there'll be the IMDb of the performing arts, right? That would be the end game, potentially. But meanwhile, they're able to aggregate valuable content and they're making that available for others to use. The way you use that is with sort of these arcane queries, not anything that you need to do, but there's ways to query a database. If you go back, to the 90s, if you're old enough, you might have done that in various kinds of, databases, contact databases, to come up with the query of, journalists in a certain geography out of your national media list or something like that. So similar ways to query Wikidata as well as arts data and to use that. So I wanted to mention this range of directories in part because, if you've ever looked up movie listings, you understand intrinsically how powerful that is, right? I don't have to sell you on it. And I think you also intrinsically can understand how we don't have anything like that in the arts, in the performing arts, quite yet. So we keep using Google as our best avenue, right? The problem with Google is that it's proprietary. Somebody owns that and makes money off it, who is not us. How do I feel about Wikidata in that sense? Well, at least it's a not-for-profit, right? And it makes validated, verified information available to anybody, including Google, but also us. Like, we can actually do stuff with that if we wanted to, as a sector, as somebody interested in technology. So far, so good. So just to be super, super clear, the kind of things that Google will pull out from these open knowledge bases or linked open data directories is stuff like, it'll pull up the summary from Wikipedia, as it did for Ronnie Burkett, right? That first sentence that shows up. So that first sentence is really important, right? And there's a formula in which encyclopedia entries are written. You'll notice that. It might pull basic factual information like date of birth, place of birth, related people, the related Facebook, Instagram, all of that. They might actually pull that from Wikidata, but it won't tell you in that knowledge panel in particular. In terms of photos, Google often uses the Wikimedia Commons photos. And they use a bunch of other sources, including your website. And Google has an ability, they're huge. They triangulate this information really quite well. And they decide what to use, right? One of the things I want to say to you, that these numbers are probably about a year old. There were only 91 million items in Wikidata. Now, if you think about the 8 billion people that we are in the world, you'll understand quickly that 91 million items is a tiny number. It's still early for this stuff. What's interesting is that 31% of that was scientific in nature. So people in biotech and various kinds of sciences, coming out of the academia world, have for a long time been sharing information about stuff with each other, about scientific information. So they've been sharing this, for a long time, and they were one of the, big users initially of Wikidata, right? Only 9% was about humans. So the opportunity is huge. Right? If we can organize ourselves and start taking this seriously, the opportunity is absolutely humongous to actually play and generate a visibility on par with what Hollywood does and what IMDb generates for folks. That's kind of what this is about, right? Wikidata is a trusted source for many sites. So that's why we care about it. If it wasn't a trusted source for this kind of information, we wouldn't care about it. Arts data, the Canadian sort of version of trying to aggregate information, should become a trusted source for sources like for users like Google, right? And the idea there basically is if I can own or aggregate the Canadian performing arts ecosystem, then I can actually sell that to people. I can sell that to Google. I don't have to just worry about I don't just have to worry about providing all that stuff for free. As you might imagine, building databases isn't actually free. The sort of last piece I want to spend a few minutes on is, so what is a Wikidata entry actually comprised of? So there's what they call an item or an entity. That item could be Eileen Smith, or it could be Springworks Festival. There is a property. So properties are things like Nutcracker. How do I know that's a ballet or a piece of music, right? As opposed to a perfunctory, tool that you use in the kitchen. Tchaikovsky being a person, being a composer. Those are all properties. And you can generate, statements with that, where you basically say, Nutcracker is composed by Tchaikovsky. There's a bunch of values attached to the person and the play, and the ballet, I should say. So this is how a basic statement is constructed. And each of these pieces of information are basically sitting like they're singular pieces of information that become statements within a listing, right? So it's a pretty strange way of, like I say, you don't get to write sentences. If you think about, what Siri and Alexa are doing, the speakable internet, the voice-based assistants, they would be taking information like that and form sentences with it, right? It's very easy to form sentences when I have the basic placeholders for stuff. It's one of the reasons why the weather forecast is so great when you use Alexa or something like that, right? It's an incredibly weather forecasts are incredibly buttoned down. They always have the same pieces of information. And the only variable is the date and the location that you're in, but everything else is completely standardized. Temperature, is it cloudy, is it sunny, is it going to be raining at this afternoon, right? So these voice activated assistants can generate really natural sounding statements with that. Well, they can do the same thing with Wikidata entries because they're standardized, right? That's one of the important things about, and that's what structured data does too on your website. It standardizes information, and that's where that level of understanding comes from that we now ascribe to a machine. Like they're not just, regurgitating strings of letters and numbers. They actually know what they are. They know that something is an event. They know that something is a price. They know that something is a name of a person versus the name of a building versus the name of a play, right? Because all of those things are specifically identified in these kinds of databases, as well as in your structured data on your own website, if you do that, right? So I just want to I'm saying that to sort of figure out the dovetailing of those two things a little bit. So what does it take to generate a Wikidata entry? It is stupidly simple. All you need is an account. So I have an account, right? It's like literally like you just set it up, you create a username and password, you have an account. It's instant. It's like setting up a Facebook account. And when you have an account, there are things you can do. You can, I don't know, let's just do a search for Eileen Smith. So there's 2 of you in here, but none of them are working in the arts. So if I do this search and I kind of go like, yeah, it's none of these people. Yeah, still like nothing here looks like it has anything to do with any of the work you do. So one of the things I can decide to do is, as soon as I find it, I can, sorry, I'm going to go back to the main page. There should be a create an item option here. If anybody sees it on the sidebar,
I think
I'm
it's
not.
the 4th one down from the top on the menu.
Create a new item. There we are. Thank you.
It's just because I've been looking at it on the side while you've been talking about it.
Absolutely. So you create a new item. You get to say, oh, it's, it's called whatever, Eileen Smith. I get to, let's just say blah blah for now. I mean, I might talk about your I don't know what you are. You're an artistic director, you run organizations, whatever, right? Like a short description like that. For the National Arts Center, it would be premier performance venue in Ottawa, Ontario, something like that, right? And then if there's any aliases, like often it's abbreviations. The conundrum of abbreviations in organizations. We use them, but the world doesn't. So there's an opportunity for that. And then you simply hit create. And lo and behold, you get an entry. One that I created a while back, because why wouldn't I? Was one for the Klondike Institute of Art and Culture up in Dawson City. So once you create that, so all of these descriptions, different languages, pretty much I'm the only editor on that. They're tiny, so I sometimes use them just to practice. And you can see in its history, exactly like on Wikidata, you see all of the different times. I created that back in December 2020. You see all the edits I made. You see that I'm pretty much almost the only user, except then a bot showed up at some point and added or corrected a couple of things. That's great. That's just how this works. And you basically can add information as you go. So you're adding values to a statement that already exists. You can add qualifiers to that statement that I'd created, and then you can add references. So those are all ways to try to, for Wikidata to say, oh, there's a reference for a thing, there's a qualifier for a thing. It's way to sort of generate trusted, accurate, factual information, right? Everything is a field like this. You'll see these drop-down menus happen. So those tend to be contextual. They're often not complete, but they give you a really good hint of what the right kind of information in a field might be, right? If the date of inception needs to be corrected, I can actually do that. I can say, oh, it was actually January 2020. Or January 2000, not December 1999. I can correct that. I add a reference to it and off I go. You'll see that a lot of references here are actually reference URLs. They're web pages. That's really convenient for us. It's one way in which you can allow, your own website to be an authoritative source, right? It's kind of helpful. If you have multiple references for a thing, nothing wrong with adding those at all. It's useful. Field of work, they do a lot of different things. So you see how they're an art gallery, they have an artist in residence programs, they run some festivals, they do workshops, they present performing arts, right? One of those multidisciplinary places like a lot of you are used to that as well. And then again, like a lot of this, I didn't take time to reference. I would have to use their own site to reference that, or news articles. You can use news articles if they're online. You can also say that something comes out of an encyclopedia that exists in the printed world, in the physical world. That's an appropriate reference too. And again, you get all of these pieces here. Legal form. It's a nonprofit organization. How cool is that? So those are all these pieces that, right, as you're trying to play with that, you get to kick the tires a little bit. You can also add new statements about a thing, right? So if there's kind of some information that I haven't added yet that I've missed, you can add that here. You may have noticed that they don't have any reference information. You see some of the things that pop up are other images that you can link to Wikimedia Commons, or references such as YF and other databases. So if you were to create that, it asks you immediately for the what is the numeric YF record here. Everything becomes a number, right? Like a social insurance number, humans become numbers, or entities become numbers. So everything in these other databases are also numbers. And so you can add that, and you can add the reference to it, which chances are, until I add some kind of gobbledygook here. I want to add a qualifier to that. I can say, oh, it's a student, whatever, right? You see these drop downs, they're quite extensive. And like I say, they're not always complete for the thing that you're trying to do, but they give you the great hints to get you started. And does that make some sense? Are we excited about this? one thumbs up, a half a thumbs up, and a why am I looking at this? So Eileen, the key for you is to delegate. I'm certainly not suggesting that every person on earth needs to get smart about doing this, but I am suggesting that if you're interested in discoverability of who you are and what you do, this is incredibly helpful to set up for your organizations, and it's incredibly helpful to set up for key people within your organizations. So not the marketing person that comes and go every 6 months because they're on strange funding cycles or something like that. But artistic directors, executive directors, if you work with a range of playwrights, directors regularly, right? Things like that are really, really helpful. And the way that you would do some of that cross-linking is like this. You would create your organization. That is an item within Wikidata. You see the sort of, the item description up here, and you become a number. But if I want to associate people to this item, I need to create listings for the people. So I need a listing for Eileen, as I need a listing for Hermione Presents, and I need a listing for Springworks. And if I have 3 different listings and information about them, I can cross-link them. Right? And this is very helpful to do, right? Because it's in the cross-linking and cross-referencing of linked open data that it becomes ever more powerful. Right? Do I care about your office administrator in this? No, not so much. Right? But I really care about the artistic team. Right? Because that's the field you're in. Right? I might care about set designers and lighting designers. Some of those folks are incredibly well reputed, and they do fantastic work in many places, right? So they themselves can bring cachet to a production. We don't see that maybe a lot in puppetry. You might see that in major performing arts venues a little bit more, right? But that's akin with the costume designers that get recognized in film. We don't necessarily do that to the same degree for the trades that are driving our productions. But we can, and if we did, we get that level of discoverability. I know that's a repetition, but I wanted to say it again, because to me, that's actually important. But it is important to understand that it's part of a longer play that you would be, deciding is important. And because there's still few of our colleagues in the performing arts are really taking this seriously. So if the puppetry people get energized, right, you can have a really disproportionate footprint around your organizations or that part of the sector. if you wanted to. I do want to mention to you that I'm working with another organization right now on the nitty-gritty how-tos of like the specific listings, the specific statements you want to create about a thing, and then the best way to construct, like these items, how to best construct them. So within the next few weeks, there will be a very specific how-to guide where you'll get those references, say, oh, okay, here's a statement, here's the kind of statement about an entity, about an organization. What are the top, 15 or 20 statements about it? So the big gray boxes here that I want to create. And within each of these statements, how do I construct that to be correct from the Wikidata standpoint? And what are the items that I need to add within that to make like the references, the value, the qualifiers, those pieces about each statement, and make sure that everybody has a sense of how to do that. What you will discuss, I'm working with a couple of consultants on that right now. The client is Home Roots and the funder is Kapakoa through the capacity building program that Kapakoa has. So the intention is to share that body of how-to stuff with the community. So we'll publish that online. It won't be proprietary, just to Home Roots, which is a house concert network, basically. So we're doing a bunch of trials right now to figure out how to do that and how to teach people to do that, like at the level of a way level of detail below what we're talking about today. Eileen, go ahead.
If you had a series of festivals that are in topic X, in our case, puppet festivals, is there a way that they can this can cross-reference them?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just look up Leonard Podolak. So yes, you can cross-reference all of these information pieces where you would say the presenting organization might be the same. So you need a listing, a Wikidata listing for the presenting organization, right? And then each time that you create a new listing, a brand new listing, not just a reference within your the presenting organization, but an actual separate listing for each of the festivals you do, then you can cross-reference them. So Leonard is the guy who is now the executive director of Home Roots. And you see that Home Roots reference here. That is linked to what is now a Home Roots listing. Okay. And there were a bunch of other people, famous people that he's associated with. So a member of Kapakoa. We're going pretty detailed here. This is part of the project that I just referenced, right? So the Home Roots listing goes pretty deep, including it's a member of Kapakoa, right? We're really trying hard. And it has, all of its social media presences here. This is a listing we created not too long ago. By having this quite simple Home Roots listing, I'm able to associate people like Leonard to it. Leonard also has a famous father, Mitch Podolak, who's passed away a little while back. But so Mitch has a listing that we can cross-reference. Leonard is also a touring musician. So somewhere in this, the band that he used to tour with is probably referenced, and some of the awards that he's been nominated for, right? And he's got an official website. How cool is that? But all to say, I'm not seeing the band per se. I just see the Juno Awards that they were referenced for. Yeah, I think we must have created that. So all to say, we get to, sort of see those kind of cross references to awards as well. This is really helpful. So if you win the Seminovich, right, like Ronnie did, and the Seminovich Prize has a listing, or if it doesn't, we can just create that. Nothing holds us back. It's just the facts, right? You don't have to just create your own stuff. You can create other people's stuff. It's appropriate. Then those cross references become very, very powerful. So you can have that series of 5 festivals, recurring festivals, and you can build that out, with the presenting organization at the top of that, and have each of these sort of pieces linked together, and then you can have deeper information about each of the festivals, who's involved, when did it start, where does it take place, what is the content of the festival, You know, a festival you might do might be multidisciplinary, another one might just be puppets. Or you might be into, you know, world, international only stuff. So there might be slices of festivals that are quite unique, and you'd be able to represent that within this framework. And you would reference your own website plenty, right? So when Google queries the Wikidata entry, right, it knows to relate those pieces of information. Sorry, go ahead, Eileen.
I was just going to ask if UNIMA exists in it, UNIMA, which is the Union Internationale de la Marionnette. Yeah, and that's a world organization. And then there's UNIMA Canada, and then there's UNIMA Ontario, and then there's UNIMA blah, 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 blah. So
yeah, those chapters are organizations. See, industry puppetry doesn't exist. So I just want to point this out. This is cool to see. So industries are things that are defined by other people, right? So somebody decided to sort of create an industry called puppetry, but that doesn't actually exist. So they would be able to, you know, refer to that as field of work, and that's fine. You see how that works down here, right? The field of work reference doesn't have a thing, but there is an exclamation mark, a warning exclamation on industry, right? Because it's not. Maybe industry is performing arts. Even that might be too thin sliced. I'm not sure. But yeah, so you get the native labels for French. You get the full and the acronym as well. And you could link to this if you had. Oh, look, a bunch of Germans seem to have started that. You could link to this information if you have a listing for UNIMA Canada, right? And you start to sort of say, oh, we're part of this universe, we're alike, and you get those cross references happening. I see UNIMA Germany's mentioned here in that way, right? And so that and again, it's like, chances are there's no listing for this here. It's just somebody just typed it in. Or maybe there is a listing. So whenever you see these kind of exclamation things, you want to fix it, you would kind of say, oh, what's the problem? How do I explore this? You see the part of UNIMA right here. Perfect. You see the cross-referencing happening within the database, right? It becomes powerful over time. If you wanted to know whether a piece of information is used and how often it's used, there is a way to look at the page information. And this was just in the sidebar. It's right in the sidebar towards the bottom here. There's some tools. One of them is page information, and you can get sort of the basic information about what this item, what this listing in Wikidata is about, and how many page views in the last 30 days. It's just part of that standard information. And if you wanted more detail, you simply scroll down and you go to page view analysis. This is not a exact substitute for understanding, and you might have, you know, a spider user, which is a bot, or you can do a search for all users. So you get an idea, you know, that this information actually gets used. This is something that, you know, in terms of our teaching around how to try to make sense of Wikidata, this will be one of the things where we'll say, oh, you can actually see whether the users of that information that you've put on and how long it takes. It's often a couple of weeks before Wikidata starts to, you know, share that out. Like there's populating the database, and then there is Wikidata has to make that information available to its users, right? It's the second step. It usually takes a couple of weeks, it seems. But then here you can sort of keep track a little bit of that stuff gets used. You'll never see a ton of it because basically Google doesn't have to come here every day to scrape it. Google might come every day to your website, right? Because if it changes a lot, but it won't do that here because it's much more static content. That's part of why there's a you know, a few days or a couple of weeks lag in information being used. But it's one way to verify that it actually is getting used. And we're also working out right now sort of how to make sense of, you know, proving that it improves discoverability. Right, because the more proof I have behind that, the more excited you will get about it. So we're working out some methods to try to say, oh, and this actually is having an impact on the listings that you see. They're becoming more accurate, more complete, more robust, with better cross references. And ultimately what we want really to achieve is that when I do this search for, you know, Canadian puppeteers, that's some of the newer puppeteers or people that haven't had the same robust web presence actually start showing up, and then you can position yourself in, in those, also searched for or similar as kind of elements of the discoverability that you see at the bottom of these knowledge graphs, that starts to show up. So the PowerPoint that comes with this gives you lots of references to all of that stuff. So you do have visual references, and there's a bunch of links in there, and you can check stuff out sort of after this session as well. We have a couple of sessions set up for Saturday and Wednesday just to talk about stuff having to do with this series of workshops. So this is all about, sort of advanced search engine optimization, structured data, and trying to get a handle on, how you think open linked data is going to be important to you moving forward. And if by chance you try out some stuff or have recently tried out some stuff and you're hitting roadblocks, or you kind of get stuck in, what to do, those next couple of sessions are really just designed to talk it through and to figure out if we can solve it together. And if we don't, I'll figure it out and get back to you on it. Not everything can be real time. But that's the intention for the session on Saturday and this coming Wednesday that we've set up. And that would conclude that series of workshops. And then we'll have a third series of workshops. Amy, I'm not sure if you want to talk about that briefly.
Sure. Yeah, we have a few more workshops coming up. Mid-February is when they'll be starting. So we'll be sure to send out a reminder with a description of each of those as well. And also as another reminder to check out the previous workshops and materials, which are also on this website, the page which I shared earlier, which gives you access to our first conversations, which were more about, how to write stuff, what to focus on when you're writing on your website specifically, or creating content in that way. And basic SEO, or more basic SEO. And then now we've transitioned to covering how to actually put in information into your content or website or Wikidata entry that is going to concretely assist Google search engines, other search engines, in actually seeing the information about you, about your events, about your organization, about anything else that you might be working on or wanting people to see. So yeah, definitely take a look at those things. Any other questions from anybody else, or any final thoughts, Inga, before we wrap things up?
No, I appreciate your attention to this. It's kind of a strange topic, and we don't talk about it much in the arts at this point, but we will talk about it incessantly over the next couple of years. It's going to become ever more important that we figure this out. So I'm always happy to talk about discoverability and Wikidata and structured data and all of that good stuff, even though it's a lot to get your head around it. And I know there's a lot of, sort of places where you get stuck trying to implement stuff. So that's part of where, having a small community of practice around it, where you can just call up and say, hey, help me out. I know you do this now, right? That's part of what we're after here. So I'm excited to sort of have that opportunity to be part of a process to get us to all be smarter about it, and to keep advancing that, and to make it tangible, make it real for us. And like I say, that other project's going to feed sort of the next layer on nitty-gritty how-to stuff, and that'll be available before the end of the workshops that we're doing as part of the series in March. So we'll share that back with everybody here as well. And if we do some additional workshops, for some of the other projects I'm working on, we'll make sure that you're invited, obviously, as you have time and feel so inclined.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Brianne.
Awesome.
And I think we'll wrap this up for today. As always, if you have any other questions or things that come up, don't hesitate to email myself at PADE@springworksfestival.ca. And if you if you have any other thoughts or questions, please join us on Saturday or next Wednesday for the working session. If you bring your questions with you. And just once again, thank you to Canada Council for their support of these workshops. Thank you very much for joining us.